These men of faith spouting off about the same shit, whether you jumped on the Trump wagon or not, continue to harp on about what continue to harp on about God's judgment and repentance. I see the growth of the prosperity gospel simultaneously leading down what I had always thought was the opposite of one of the messages that cross both testaments. The Bible I just quoted has over 1,000 pages, so it's probably pretty easy to find verses supporting whatever it is you want to say. Of the barely 100 pages of my own words written here, I cannot imagine the variety of ways it can be diced up. Jargon not far off from what the judiciary seems to enjoy, or even the little business and jargon not far off from what the judiciary seems to enjoy, or even the business entities themselves. Little Caesars was a hellacious awakening to the meritocracy system. These had a lackadaisical ma and pa atmosphere, despite the poverty of most of the staff. Mama V seemed to inspire loyalty and pride in the simplest work tasks. When the financial pinch started to be felt personally, and I had to leave for Little Caesars, I felt bad because I didn't feel sad enough. The pay was shit, as were the hours, and I began to harbor resentment over the actions I interpreted as disrespectful. Saw myself as ultimately a number, so why not go somewhere that doesn't try and play coy about it? Jobs that our society loves to shit on can still provide a sense of pride, joy, success, learning, even camaraderie. Tasks even in the teenage non-jobs should be accomplished with accuracy, speed, and to maintain a physically clean environment. Dedication, meaning those characteristics and more, all should be developed systematically by some nature in every set of hands with any potential to become involved with the work. So what about when these goals are met, even exceeded? After being passed up for the spawn of goat and whale, as I so fondly referred to her as, I would leave for Little Caesars instead of having it as a second job as originally planned. Pathetic that we as a nation have allowed ourselves to be led to believe that certain tasks deserve to be shat on by the innovators who established these too-big-to-fail industries. Absolutely no reason in a country screaming about liberty for its citizens to abandon the physical object's economic stability that gives the words any meaning. Freedom should not be the consumption of time for the sake of bare essentials, leaving all pursuits of life to the wayside, e.g., our art, passions, hobbies, improved health, which includes the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom. That is, unless your value is deemed worthy. I was pleased with the situation, for I didn't want to consume my life in the pursuit of wealth, which in my mind takes taking two jobs said in action. I did not know what the overhead for owning the apartment complex I stayed in could be even now, but I understand that treating others like an inferior might just backfire. Bills were piling up, and I cared little for voluntary legal documents. The light bill got paid later and later, rent getting divided up in smaller portions paid with constantly mounting late fees, insurance only to tag the vehicle after receiving a couple tickets, minuscule medical care, and certainly food barely worth consumption unless grabbed from the kitchen I worked in. The sustainability walls were starting to close in on us, with I being the only employed individual amongst us, and I could feel that something was going to have to change if we truly desired to continue the small amount of freedom we had carved for ourselves. Sometime after the fallout of Juliana, the retrogression of rent payments became too much for the apartment manager's sensibilities. He cop-knocked on the door one morning to let me know a shitstorm was coming down on my head because I couldn't be late anymore. Small, balding white man must have seen meekness in my initial replies as a reason to work himself up into yelling the same nonsense about the rent until I finally got in that he would get his $200-ish before the office closed and shut the door in his face. I chain-smoked a couple packs of cigarettes. I chain smoked a couple packs of cheap cigarettes to regain control and began my second job hunt. Now only reliant on a fast food check, I was eager to get a cushion as fast as possible, for the plasma donations were timely and provided little relief. As a white male in the early 20s with no kiddos, there was no food stamps. God, the disgraces I stooped to stay free. Distracted. Despite the general manager's assurances that his Little Caesars was like a family, I could read. The pamphlets, guidelines, handbooks were cold, logical, full of insight about the details printed for anyone to see. They were speaking to just anonymous persons that needed every step, every movement painstakingly explained to assist the goal of the business: profit. Alas, being shit at so much, my first couple months were not fruitful. I was slow to take up the movements necessary in production. I struggled to keep pace at any station due to weakness, and my original 30-hour week instantly went to 20 the next schedule, and 15 the next, as I was tasked with my strength, standing with a sign at the side of the road 4 days a week for 3 hours, 6 if lucky. While I blame a lot of the idiosyncrasies of my parental units for much of the outlook I continue to hold, I can only thank them for the trait that brought me through that moment: resentment. I despise the smug assuredness dick faces would presume over my continued failures. The mockery was fuel to my desire to ram the accusations down their boisterous throat. Not with words which held no true rebuttal, mostly due to garbled incoherent noises being my brain's only defense, but out of nowhere undeniable evidence to discredit their perception in a blatant manner. Thankfully, others cared as little to be there as I did, and or had other methods of income, apparently, as I began to seek the shifts of others wanting time off as my scheduled hours fell. Months passed, and the GM couldn't ignore the pace I set, and began building a faux sense of fellowship over our shared atheism. A couple years would pass, and his reliance on me finally drew the notice of our area supervisor, who I imagine was partly responsible for my sought-after promotion. On 7:45 an hour, the petite 10-cent, 15-cent raises at a whim were nothing but a farce for paperwork's sake in my eyes, and, to truly reach a level of comfort once held by us, the assistant manager position was where my will was set, though it could hardly stop there, of course. The pleasure at the shock on that fucking douche's face when I finally started getting rent in early. Quickly lost when I thought how he was probably patting himself on the back. Just a little tough love needed. Yuck. Focus. This journey to find balance in the joys of living to the necessities of sustaining it would lead to my continued promotions, both roommates finding employment, the loss of our pursuit in a heavy metal band, and the loss of sight in what I had set out with them to begin with. My fantasy novel took a back seat to the new video games, TV series, and movies we could now afford. No more Boondock Saints on repeat, interrupted by Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. No more Boondock Saints on repeat, interrupted only by Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Hell, we even got internet. No more jacking it from others in the building. My conservative nature took like a glove to the system of management businesses promote, but I thought I could do it more honestly, with more integrity, by my example. I just needed more power, more control over the operations of my a store. My area supervisor quickly stood out as a model of leadership instead of the overbearing micromanager with little comprehension of the scope of the tasks he assigned. I like to think this was due to my insane efforts to show exactly what his orders entailed, though instead of recognizing the ridiculousness of the requests overall, he awarded me greater economic power. I thought this was the way of things back then, no other choices, which formed the foundation of my practices in the Leavenworth, Kansas location that I eagerly took up as my latest longitudinal movement. It was easy to lie about my motivations and deeds when the example of one of the franchise owners was constantly available to study. I swear to this day he garnered elation from his appearance at his poverty centers in costly clothing, popular vehicles worth tens of thousands on rotation. Fatherfucker even showed up with the original Google glasses that failed miserably. I pushed for excellence in my crew, and in return they got more responsibilities. I mean hours as raises were above my head. Obama-Romney-Care hit, and I swung for the fences, cutting labor like a good house nigga to promote my bootlickers to the management positions for real raises, and a circumvention of the insurance policy now forcing those too poor for such a monthly expense to seek multiple jobs for hours, because for damn sure the corporate franchise accounts weren't going to shell out a fine for any full-time uninsured peasants. Workers. The group on control needed tightening to bring the numbers to the proper level. Food cost was rising, and labor was one of the few percentages I physically affected at this point. I fucking killed a damn old man with 15 plus years at that son of a bitch. Breathe. Oligarchs, franchise owners, barely even afford those in my position insurance, and I skated by off the inclusion to my parents' insurance till 26 years of age. Not that I received income sufficient to warrant using it. After rent, electricity, water, sewage, trash, phone, insurance, gas, food, cigarettes, weed, and miscellaneous mundane supplies, excess funds that weren't saved for a future joy splurge here and there went into what little quality of life improvements I was capable of at the store. I briefly tasted of the dream that perhaps I could rise above the self-inflicted stumbling blocks to obtain that house, afford more than just my basic animal existence, maybe be worthy of meeting a life I had forsaken due to false hopelessness. A loss of my current love interest and a change in the circumstances around my employment at Little Caesars ultimately pushed me once again to do something drastic. That's when I took the ultimate disgrace in my mind and began working for Asplin Tree Trimming Experts Company, contracted at the power company my father worked at. Nepotism. What a lovely feather to add to the cap of what insanely small pride I kept losing. Imagine what shock I had when, to my expectations, the blue-collar, honest American work of this tree trimming company was rife with the same flaws and habits plaguing the fast food industry. I had hit reset on any progress to seek greener pastures, but found myself sharing rentals with Esteros and Yalahila, and beginning the budgeting process once again in hopes I could purchase a place of my own. The new spending power at my fingers helped me hold the blinders tight. I started looking for houses in preparation while seeking out doctors, dentists, and less processed food choices, hoping to change habits that I knew were problematic. I had gotten back into utilizing the internet as well as purchasing my desktop, began procuring tools allowing the capability for fixing random problems in our rental home that seemed trivial to bother the landlord. Not much was making it into the savings account, especially when I finally had the excess funds to go out with friends to bars, clubs, concerts, events, so on and so forth. Hell, even if it was just going out on public land to drink and chill, at least I could afford alcohol and weed to chip in. But as the funding increased as well as my expenditure, I found it harder and harder to separate my thoughts from the insanely similar problematic practices that brought me to abandon Little Caesars with no respect or courtesy. It finally dawned on me that the disgusting directives driving management's maneuvering were not unique to the food industry, but cornerstones of business fundamentals. The push for power, control, obedience was alive and well with regulations coming out daily at times. Someone doesn't pay attention when using a gas-powered pole saw and cuts a line. All gas-powered pole saws gone. Somebody one-hands a chainsaw in a tree with poor posture, positioning resulting in error. All trim saws gone, and I could go on. Asplund was up to the same tactics, the only variables being the relation to the task of tree trimming. As our wages rose year after year by a minuscule percentage while leaving the future of our contract in the air, other small changes started popping up, like the loss of safety incentive checks for gear, crackdowns on dress code requirements, and ever-increasing stacks of paperwork being handed down while they mouthed production. Our union had and continues to take actions, make air vibrations, to placate and assure us that our best interest is truly their goal. But I look around seeing the opposite. On one side, brotherhood, unity, workers' rights, respectful discourse, job site safety. But on this side, percentage cuts on wages for union health insurance, stock market retirements, compromises with Asplund on gear and training, random preference on the individual level, and possibly worst, the sea of gossip around the aforementioned and more. You're all just humans, like anyone else. Your history playing your actions like Beethoven, believing. I can only speculate what my employer's part to play in our representation may be, and its potential effect on the outcomes of our negotiations. I do know that it's no different than anywhere else, no matter the details. It's why I keep trying not to throw accusation around, because just one more glass. It's why I keep trying to not throw accusations around, because what do you do differently? No example exists to have stood the test of time in our records or in this day to set the path. The purpose of bringing up those quotes by Saul and Jesus on money was to remind myself of this very reasoning. 1 Timothy 6:5. Perverse disputings of men of corrupt minds, and destitute of the truth, supposing that gain is godliness, from such withdraw thyself. But godliness with contentment is a great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some covet after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Of course, that whole chapter opens up with, let as many servants as are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor, that the name of God and his doctrine be not blasphemed. And they that have believing masters, let them not despise them, because they are brethren, but rather do them service, because they are faithful and beloved, partakers of the benefit. These things teach and exhort. This is a bit off the mark from what I read here, Matthew 6:35. Therefore take no thought, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or wherewithal shall we be clothed? Why is it that ye murmur among yourselves, saying, we cannot obey thy words, because ye have not all these things? Wherefore seek not the things of this world, but seek ye first to build up the kingdom of God, and to establish his righteousness. Matthew 10:8. Provide neither gold nor silver nor brass in your purse, nor scrip for your journey, neither two coats, neither shoes, nor yet staves, for the workman is worthy of his meat. And into whatsoever town or city ye shall enter, inquire whoin it is worthy, and there abide till ye go thence. And whosoever shall not receive you, nor hear your words, when ye depart out of that house or city, shake off the dust of your feet for a testimony against them. And verily I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. Matthew 12:41. Behold, thy mother and thy brethren stand without, desiring to speak with thee. But he answered and said unto the man that told him, who is my mother, and who are my brethren? And he stretched forth his hand towards his disciples, and said, behold my mother and my brother. And he stretched forth his hand toward his disciples, and said, behold my mother and my brethren. Matthew 15:2. Why do thy disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. But he answered and said unto them, why do ye also transgress the commandment of God by your traditions? For God commanded, saying, honor thy father and mother. And he that curseth father or mother, let him die the death which Moses shall appoint. But ye say, whosoever shall say to father and mother, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, it is a gift from one, and honor not his father and mother, it is well. Matthew 16:27. Break not my commandments for to save your lives, for whosoever will save his life in this world shall lose it in the world to come. Therefore forsake the world and save your souls. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Matthew 19:24. And again I say unto you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. When his disciples heard this, they were exceedingly amazed, saying, who then can be saved? But Jesus beheld their thoughts, and said unto them, with men this is impossible, but if they will forsake all things for my sake, with God whatsoever things I speak are possible. I try to remind myself that no matter the size or category of wealth, they aren't any different than any other human being. The way I read it, the wealth itself was never the problem, but the lifestyle it gives, the desperation to hold on to it, or the pretenses of generosity believed to inspire accumulation. Jesus didn't want us to be slaves to anybody other than God, and in his mind, money stood firmly in that path, but only because of what we as human beings were willing to justify under the wide net we allow money to encompass. He recognized that money was nothing but a human construct, and as such had whatever potential we desired for it. That desire, in a utilitarian sense, was the easiest denominator to eliminate, supposedly allowing men to be free from one another, and understanding as to why this freedom was in fact a call to humility from us to each other, which would provide a different wealth. However, where's the example? The proof that we as a species can study, ponder, and test to improve these symptoms of living. How can I call out for vengeance nigh unto the reckoning of the French nobility, when I might point the finger at trends treads the same path as all those before. Monkey see, monkey do. Man, is it fucking difficult, especially in the day and age of one of the most prevalent and disgusting scams backed by human reasoning in the annals of history. Insurance. Hundreds of years showing us time and again how such a system can be exploited, and yet its growth to infest the lives of individuals in numerous degrees continues to be pushed even by the average civilian. Their relationship with business I've been so happy to spew venom at is only a product of their conjunction to the end goal of all the human beings involved, monetary stability. No matter nation, creed, or era, these companies have been bound to their resource, the source of the money and those tied to its origin. The scandals recorded against them only make clear the ties of the humans in charge of our livelihoods to those of wealth and popularity, despite the pandering jargon to steer the reader to a bad apple conclusion. The names are more difficult to remember than the actual suffering felt due to their actions, but is this not the purpose of a corporate entity? The lead gets buried quickly, though for even that statement is a distraction to the core of what leads to civilian suffrage. Pay not attention to the methods of obfuscated tediousness that lead to your stressors, but demand justice for the frivolous frolicking plastered in our friendly news outlets for record of such indignities. Can't afford to leave your family a means of support upon passing? Don't blame your employer. Pay this guy a little dough each month. Can't afford to replace your transportation in case of misadventure? Don't rail at the motor companies. Just give this dude some cash each month. Can't afford the amenities to your residents showing your support for American excellence? Don't look to your government. Just give your realtor a portion of funds each month. Don't look to your government. Just give your retailer a portion of your funds each month. Don't look to your government. Just give your retailer a portion of funds each month. Your hardships are not an implication of the practices inherent within the entirety of the enterprise, but a product of an individual's lavishness openly on display. A view easier to sell if a popular moral high point can be applied. American heritage. American characters, James Hazen Hyde. The elder Hyde had come down to Manhattan from his Catskill birthplace in the mid-1850s at the age of 16. After putting in 7 years at the Mutual Life Insurance Company, he decided he could do better. He paid claims promptly, and the business grew around him, but he continued to live frugally, drawing a salary of $1,500 a year. He imposed this same rigorous thrift on his son James, who was born in 1876. Hyde graduated from 1898, taking honors in German and French. The next year, his father died of overwork, leaving the 23-year-old Hyde in charge of $1 billion of life insurance. Joseph Pulitzer saw a story here, and the world, which a few days earlier had described Hyde as a serious and an excellent man of business, now changed its tune and decided he was a little too Frenchified for decent Americans. The welter of charges and countercharges about Hyde's management of Equitable brought on an investigation of the whole industry. The next year, new government regulations overhauled the entire business. Really? Did it though? Justice Department recovers $1.4 billion in fraud and false claims. This brings total recoveries since 1986, when Congress substantially strengthened the Civil False Claims Act to $15 billion. This year's outstanding recoveries in civil fraud cases, said Peter Keisler, attests to the fortitude of whistleblowers who report fraud and the tireless efforts of civil servants who investigate and prosecute these cases. Mr. Keisler also paid tribute to Senator Charles Grassley of Iowa and Representative Howard L. Berman of California, who sponsored the 1986 amendments to the False Claims Act. Without this important legislation strengthening the Act, and, in particular, the Quitom provisions which give ordinary citizens the courage and protection to blow the whistle on the government fraud, such cases run the gamut of federally funded programs from Medicare and Medicaid to defense contracts, disaster assistance loans, and agricultural subsidies. Subsidies. The realtor's share increases up to 30% if the United States declines to intervene, and the whistleblower pursues the action alone. The Department of Health and Human Services reaped the biggest recoveries, largely attributable to its Medicare and Medicaid programs. Substantial recoveries were also made by the Office of Personnel Management, which administers the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program, the Department of Defense for its TRICARE insurance program, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the Railroad Retirement Board. Another $41.9 million recovered from PricewaterhouseCoopers, LLP, for alleged false claims for travel expenses in connection with its contracts with numerous federal agencies, and $30.5 million from Harvard University and its agents in connection with the United States Agency for International Development Agreement to advise Russia in its transition to a market economy. Hey, you got off lucky, Art Williams, straight from the Department of Justice desk, and not a single mention of your part to play in those revisions to the fraud legislation. I swear I haven't even begun to break the surface of all the bullshit governments let money get away with, and despite all the pages this work will have in its totality, I still won't even come close. Just fucking platitudes, metaphors, and presumptions that only serve as an extension of self-desire to understand and overcome a mentality of self-destruction. That very reasoning is what led me by the hand. That very reasoning is what led me by the hand to stop hyper-focusing on the love of money and search for a more tangible cause for the actions taken. I cannot eliminate money from this process despite my best efforts. However, I now categorize the search of economic stability under a greater, more encompassing happenstance. Power control is something every human can probably relate to. Different words and experiences may color our perception of what forms we recognize in our own lives, or more specifically, in our own actions, but the similarities consume my thoughts. I'm using generalities and obscure diction again. All the quotations I've used up till now have many common themes to me. One of those is the attempts at managing our environment in all its aspects. While working at Little Caesars, I fully embraced the method with which I was raised. Speak when spoken to. Ask only how high if you ask at all. The rents softened fast, though. proven in my winning freedom from the pants down paddle switching for my younger siblings, including myself. I held that grudge till the day I woke up to my stupidity and decided to act in a manner that led to my freedom instead of it increasing adversity till the time came to grasp said liberty. The action I felt so appalled by was the experience of the consequences having meant nothing at all. Pertinence dependent solely on the individuals involved, not a statement of physical law. While growing up, trying to learn how to navigate the world with my strange mentality, the revelation that their quickness to admonish problematic behavior was not an actual standard, but a product of desire from them, surmised the conclusion that judgment for personal sins was only a matter of acknowledgement. I'm sure all who have siblings are well aware of being forced to take responsibility for the actions of another for whatever reason tickled the fancy of the figure in authority. Heh. I remember a moment before we truly were allowed to watch television. My father actually tried to accuse me of hiding the remote. Obviously I had never touched it, but obviously I was lying, for my father obviously hadn't hidden it from himself, and my siblings were too young to have done it. It certainly didn't just grow legs and walk away. Sometime after my switching didn't reveal its location, I was allowed out of my room when the remote was pulled from the lazy boy cushion. Instead of an apology, I got a heartfelt discussion about remaining respectful to one's elders even in the face of adversity. This doesn't even take the cake for the genesis of real hatred taking root in my mind. I was still young enough to be caught up in the rhetoric, hook, line, and sinker. I bore the fault for my reaction to the accusation, and after I finally received the promise that, now 13, I was too old to receive a paddling, it was proven that too was worth no more than the vibrations of air molecules that transmitted the information. I'm no saint. Things I desire to accomplish I'm on top of like white on rice, but something not so exciting interrupting whatever activity I'm engaged in can be put off a second. That was unacceptable this night. I had been called one time to brush my teeth in preparation for prayers, and that was all I got. Even though there never came a second call, even though I was not even a full minute in my response, I got a good paddling. Now, somewhere between the ages of 13 and 15, the last straw had been drawn. Liars, hypocrites, authoritarians were all I saw in the place of parents. Funny, this event still didn't have me questioning the methods, only the humans behind them. Spare the rod, spoil the child. Tough love. Still can't say I've shaken myself of the trope. The idea of teaching consequences for actions seems like a state of matter at times, with how ingrained aspects of the thought permeate so much of our lives. How does one teach if the knowledge gained from failure is removed from the failure itself? Now the child has heard and understands not to touch the top of the stove, but is it because the comprehension of the damage heat will perform on the body? More likely it's because you said it's hot, because you said so. However, are you just supposed to let them burn the shit out of themselves? I know I didn't give my parents an option. I just waited till everyone was in bed, then tested the varying degrees of heat at certain distances, as well as how quickly I could touch the top without being burned. Like all things I was told not to touch. Like all things I was told not touch, I became obsessed with many of the forbidden objects that warranted punishments to dissuade interest. Poor logic, no. Personal logic, based on faith, held by them only kept me in check for as long as the supportive reasoning was not disrupted by alternative perceptions that contained even the smallest ring of truth. If any part of physical reality I have lived by on the word of others shows a fraction of falsehood, The whole mentality now has to be broken down, dissimulated, and reproved with greater detail and critical thinking. To be more concise, while growing up, why was everyone so adamant that my hair had to be cut short when figures such as Jesus and Samson, adherents to the Nazarite code and examples of righteousness, kept their hair long? Alas, my disgust at how easily I find it to defend the doling out of reprimands still has yet to change my stance in spite of every single day providing more examples of how the method is an utter failure. While growing up, I tried to stay positive about the system my parents utilized for teaching me right from wrong. However, as more events piled up to support the theory of their hypocrisy, I had to grapple with other hypotheses as to what actions were involved in achieving the goal. A standout example was during the early years of my younger brother. I was somewhere between first and second grade when my youngest brother finally reached the age my parents started to crack down on potty training. I had already witnessed my sister receive a far more caring and lenient approach, but I had it explained very carefully and maturely that we didn't treat women in such a manner. The justification for my brother damn near being bribed instead of beaten to obey was another crack in my sanity. It wasn't the first instance of the seeming double standard, and as I've already written, it wouldn't be the last. It didn't take long into my teenage years to feel a bit butthurt about the whole way. It didn't take long into my teenage years to feel a bit butthurt about the way the system played out. So I focused on the portion that I felt made the penance acceptable, the knowledge imparted from the discussion around the offense. Can you really turn your nose at my struggle around the quandary when all our organizations seem to love some form of the ridiculous cliche? My school certainly wasn't above the criticism, and I doubt much has changed since I left. The demerit system was just one way they could try and curtail behaviors some of us just decide to bring into school with us some days. For me, demerits added up, and at a certain point you spent time after school writing sentences, usually from the scriptures. Of course, the good teachers chose verses seemingly pertaining to the transgression. I can't tell you how many times I wrote verses about respecting elders and teachers and parents. The perception of control needed to mete out consequences requires a level of recognition. What might be recognized is whatever brings you to the conclusion of listening, at least outwardly. That, of course, is the problem. Is there any high ground to be claimed if the call for improved etiquette only imparts the lesson of greater discretion? Can't take responsibility for how an individual interprets your guidance. Though, Just redo that. Can't take responsibility for how an individual interprets your guidance, though, Uniform's only purpose is to inspire conformity, something kinda commie if you ask me. But even public schools seem to like playing with related regulations, attempting to improve performance. The uniform I dealt with was pretty limited in choices, but that did not stop many of us from... Son of a bitch. The uniform I dealt with was pretty limited in choices, but that didn't stop many of us from... Son of a bitch. Alright, come on, Chris. The The uniform I dealt with was pretty limited in choices, but that didn't stop many of us finding accessories or ways to wear the obligated dress in ways not specifically noted in the handbook. It's almost amazing how fast humans, even children, turn into lawyers when seeking individualism, regardless of ulterior intentions. The cyclical nature of verbal back and forth between students and instructors was almost always a matter of perseverance, with many of us trying to reason our case far beyond the point of the teacher's patience. The exception was always the one that went from 0 to 10 at a pin drop. Those who didn't fuck around handing out what authority was allowed when it was possible to use, only got tested by the students who decided to not give a fuck about the chastisements they felt the teachers had as their limit. At this point, I could give an example of a student getting suspended for his disregard of the dress code, but let's be honest, the reproof was for his attitude in response of being in violation. I imagine many who ascribe to some structure of hierarchy would have seen his responses as a problem, therefore needing correction. I know I did. His reactions to questions' demands frequently had my eyes bulging in their sockets. I would be completely blown away by the nonchalant attitude he kept as he dug his hole deeper. Ristokoth and his family lived in significant poverty, and his single mother struggled to keep a handle on him. She drove an old beater station wagon that seemed to have issues getting Ristokoth and his siblings to school regularly. And while I'm sure I heard stories even then, looking back, I'm almost positive she struggled with the use of drugs. I don't speak of the hard stuff, the shit you've been wired to recall when that word is used, for the only difference between those and prescriptions are the individuals pushing them. Not that I state this as rebuke to her and her child's behavior either. That freedom to take into one's body whatever is desired belongs to the individual, and I would take whatever the doctors recommended too when dealing with a crippling disability. Ristokoth seemed to derive pleasure from pushing her buttons, and one day I thought to myself, no wonder when I watched his mother lay into him one morning, screeching insults with little criticism that could be used to improve him, causing their tardiness, and immediately felt shame. I thought to myself how others would interpret the outbursts of my own parents when I wore their patient thin out in public. Takes two to tango, and I knew Ristokoth loved to dance. It's funny, on a day-to-day basis I would fluctuate between admiration and hatred for him, at times literally entertaining thoughts of the ways I could murder him, and the next day seeing his praises in my head as he stood up for the students, speaking bluntly, as to equal the manner used on us, and then dealing with the repercussions. I mention this probably common feeling for most as strange because I've always been a bit too black and white in my mentality. I haven't changed. When I've settled on hatred, there is no redemption. Or I should say, I have yet to witness the target even tentatively take the actions I see as recognition of their fuckery. Except Ristokoth. His odd moments of clarity and humility that we shared briefly and sparingly would sow the seed of that duality of man concept. Ristokoth seemed to comprehend that the fault wasn't all on his mom, or even his white absent father, or even the overbearing religious structure his peers seemed to practice. However, that didn't give him an excuse in my mind for the get what you can when you... However, that didn't give him an excuse in my mind for the get what you can, when you can, how you can outlook he touted about. All I got are my words and my balls. Boy, did he love to view himself as a corrupter. Thought he was a little hood rat in a prep school, there to twist all the little innocents away from their guardians' teachings. His accusations of naivety towards me at our first acquaintance, all too familiar, instantly stuck him on the list of people I'd like to torture to their end. My desire to silence these accusations were inhibited by my lack of ability to speak coherently and be listened by those I sought to refute. Though I also lacked the evidence along with the control due to the mental fission over my parents whose orders had encouraged me to inhabit my room and read books. I have the infuriating incapability to remember spoken words, conversations, despite my efforts to listen, which of course encouraged random people, even those I despised, to just share their struggles, hopes, dreams, feelings. I imagine I got a bit of a complex from all the times I heard "you're not listening" from. I guess not the dog we'd eventually get. Not that of course this helped. If you can't recall what was literally just spoken to you, you're still not listening. Books provided a visual reference to the words, seemingly aiding my memory. Hell, when I used to dream, I would swear to you that it was almost like reading a novel, but somehow containing visuals, making my insane nightmares all the more vivid in the mind's eye. It's also why I was insanely good about the letter of the law. But it would take well into my 20s to settle on what I consider the spirit to be. I would hold fast to a belief that I didn't practice until that time. For example, the moment I had my subconscious biases logically hurled in my face through the black crime statistic. The problem with researching as a knob lies with the ability to sift through the very general and basic information available for comparison. I can't even find the videos or statistics that were supposed to jog the memory of exactly how wrong I fucking was. Some period of time before the 2016 election, I had latched on to some dumbass statistic about either the black-on-black crime rate or the percentage of black inmates in our prisons, and had another instance similar to the abortion scenario with Juliana. My rambling and excessive use of exposition for reaching a point seems to make it easy to interrupt me with rebuttals on the assumption of what conclusion I may be heading towards. I would love to say it was on the second topic, and I wanted to make an argument against the idea of systemic racism in favor of economic destitution, which had less basis on race than how the percentages in the reports publicized were being spoken on. However, I didn't make it far past the quoted percentage when I was interrupted, albeit again, with a topic I had not thought out thoroughly, which shut me down instantly. Yalohila responded with a passion I can only assume came from the presumption that I was about to make a racist claim, which wasn't a far left field take with my frequent animal mother quotation. She showed that even if you took the percentage out to a macro level, you still had a vast disparity that wasn't accounted for by a breakdown of crime incarceration by total population. The United States in 2010 had a population of plus 308 million. The population of white and black was 64 and 12.6% respectively. This puts white citizens at about over 197 million, and black Americans roughly around 38 million. 2008 statistics for incarcerated beings were in total approximately 2.4 million. The white and black ratios being 39 and 40%. This places the population of both around 900,000. Meaning about 2.5 of the total black populace in the USA and 0.4% of the white public. 2014 analytics from the FBI show an estimated total population of slightly more than 250 million, and the total arrests for whites and blacks for the year at 6,056,687, correspondingly. at 6,056,687 and 2,427,683, correspondingly. If I am remembering correctly, I didn't even get a portion of those statistics out about the ratios of incarcerated before Yalohila shut me down. About the ratios of incarcerated before Yalohila shut down by stating the obvious about the numbers equality being the problem itself due to the disparity in the overall pool of beings. Shut me the fuck up. I don't know how I had overlooked something so simple. Despite my irritation about the interruption, regardless of my overall point still being valid in my mind, I couldn't, with this comprehension of evidence, argue that my interpretation of the numbers was the correct method. I really see so much of the issues as one above race, transcending to the plane of life's instinct to control its environment, to a beneficiary end for self. I still will not budge from my stance that the crime issue isn't just for a specific race. The regulations and institutions charged with keeping them are obfuscating to navigate for the purpose of staging a mind... The regulations and institutions charged with keeping them are obfuscating to navigate for the purpose of staging a mindset desired by the humans overseeing the process. The exceptions allow for individuals to deal out life-altering judgments based upon perceptions, whether they be out of grievous ignorance of belief, a simple misunderstanding widely accepted, or an emotional response to personal facts that come to light. This would allow for racist assholes to make their waves, but not due to the system being racist. It feels like a nonsensical point as case after case, year after year, alongside historical instances discovered and rediscovered, furthers the refutation that our whole society doesn't just slide to fucking racism at the drop of a fucking hat the second any fucking perception of suffering fucking comes up. Okay, try again, Chris. It feels like a nonsensical point as case after case, year after year, alongside historical instances discovered and rediscovered, furthers the refutation that our whole society doesn't just slide to fucking racism at the drop of a fucking hat the second any fucking perception of suffering fucking comes up, even in just the fucking rhetoric. Fuck. I hated math growing up. I felt so much of it was subjective, and teachers couldn't expound on my ill-worded questions except with what amounted to, that's the way it is. I could never come to terms with that, and my grades showed it when I moved to algebra and above. I could copy the algorithms, imitate the steps, but it always came out wrong in some manner because I didn't understand. No different here. I see the exceptions to the majority statistic and reason all of them as part of the same issue, at the least in this instance. Those who take the responsibility of managing our affairs of state see it as their duty to take the mantle of the past and improve, which leads to standards for an ultimate goal usually told in a utopian fashion, but those who don't qualify, struggle to grasp, actively disagree, have to be taught, incentivized. From my experience and understanding, at some point everyone is willing to agree with a method of control as a tool for reformation. Funny to me, as the excuse seems an awful lot like it comes from a place of laziness, where those tasked by us bring knowledge, comprehensive explanations, and enlightened reasoning, find it far easier to enact a physical judgment as the technique for instruction most generally sprinkled with verbal encouragement. I don't have any idea of what could change this mentality, and still accomplish the effect of showing others the errors of reasoning that led to their illogical behavior. People can't just be running around stealing, enslaving, murdering, fucking each other, and our race be expected to accomplish anything. This doesn't just apply to the big obvious heavy hitters I mentioned, but my endeavor has been to include the manner in which we interact with one another, how we cope with our financial, personal, and sociological struggles in the purview of all of us. Does that truly require us to imprison each other for simply being poor, though? In Massachusetts, Ahiani Daniel Okorofor, a 73-year-old retired mental health case manager, was ordered jailed in 2014 when he appeared in a small claims court over a $508 debt for furnace repair. Okorofor said the repair was improperly done and had not fixed the problem with his furnace. At the June 2014 hearing in Belchertown District Court, he also told the judge that he did not have the funds to make the payments or hire an attorney. As his main source of income is a $2,000 monthly state pension, Okorofor explained that after paying monthly bills, including medical bills for his wife who suffers from dementia and tithing of 10% of his income to the church, he is left almost without anything. Okorofor thought he would have a chance to explain why he did not pay the bill, but the judge concluded that Okorofor could pay the debt, ruled him in contempt of court for failing to do so, and ordered him jailed for 30 days or until he paid the full amount owed. He was held at Hampshire Court Jail for 12 hours before his daughter paid his debt to secure his release at about 2 a.m. A Pound of Flesh, the criminalization of private debt. Researched and written by Jennifer Turner. I can only speculate, though, that the cases similar to the example have a core principle elegantly communicated in this quote. A judge in Perry County, Indiana, threatened Herman Button with jail if he did not agree to pay a $25 a month toward a $1,865.93 judgment his former landlord obtained for an 8-year-old debt. Button was unemployed and living on disability benefits. He appeared in court without a lawyer. The court. So we're here today for you to explain what you're going to do to pay this off. Mr. Button. I cannot. The court. Okay, but you're going to. Mr. Button. I can't do it. The court. Okay, Mr. Button. Mr. Button. Yes, ma'am. The court. For some reason, we're not communicating. All right, you're not hearing me for some reason. I'm telling you that yes, you will. You're going to tell me how you're going to go and about doing that. And I'm not going to accept I cannot, and if the next words out of your mouth are I cannot, Mr. Button, then you will sit with Mr. Glenn at the sheriff's department until you find a way that yes, you can. Ivan. Gotta pay what you owe, right? Society would surely collapse if we encouraged the choice to be freeloaders, moochers, deadbeats, and a man in debt is a slave, I think I've heard. And servants should obey their masters. Don't give me excuses, or tell me you can't. You've already failed with a mentality like that. There is no try, only do or do not. Right? Calm. I'm aware that someone like me has little ground to hurl stones at about anything I've covered, including the stuff I wish I had the patience for. This topic disproportionately affects minorities, systemic racism, white privilege, and all that jazz. That is my hang-up, though. That word disproportionately is not the word only. Whiteys seem to, at some capacity, suffer a similar fate, but that's deserved at some level, huh? Or maybe there's an underlying bigoted nature to regulations that feeds injustice at the hands of institutions that's more than happy to cuddle up with racism. You know what? Fuck that shit. I don't need to explain myself to the likes of fucking hypocrites anyway. Including you, ACLU. Fucking spouting similar talking points in the same publication you seem to disproportionately use white examples in. I can hardly claim I gave it the attention it was owed, or the research, but I didn't find a black example to the fucking appendices, in which I feel I barely butchered the summary of details worse than you. And an update would be nice, like, is this Ayani Daniel Okorofer the same as the doctor who wrote The Black Man in the United States of America? Is he an endangered species? I mean, I find it difficult to wrap my mind around a 73-year-old retiree achieving his doctorate in the 5 years between trial and publication. That tells me, though, the old hoity-toity business advocating for civil rights don't give a person... That tells me, though, the old hoity-toity business advocating for civil rights didn't give a person of color their due. I don't know. Could have just slipped the information net. Or perhaps he's just stretching his mental health work for all it's worth. Hell, maybe not even the same guy, or 100 other possibilities, I'm sure. Yes, I threw a scripture reference or two back there for shits and giggles. I just can't get over how hysterical it is, in the case of Okorofer at least, that the Christian populace wasn't up in arms, pitchforks and tiki torches, etc., over the whole outcome. Let me quote. Never did he think the June 11th hearing in the Belcherton Small Claims Court over his unpaid $508 debt would land him behind bars. Okorofer told Murphy that his main source of income is a $2,000 monthly pension from the state, and that he pays 10% of this to his church each month, Resurrection Life Ministries in Northampton, a Pentecostal church where he has been a member for more than 10 years. After paying monthly bills, including medical bills for his wife, Evelyn, who suffers from dementia, he told the judge that he is left almost without anything. According to the recording, Murphy responded, "Other than $200 you pay to your church." According to the recording, Murphy responded, "Other than the $200 you pay to your church every month." Debtor's Jail by Gina Mangiariotti. Where's your anger here, all you true believers? Where's the outrage over this oppression of religious freedom by the government? This was back in 2014, and I don't even remember hearing a peep back then. Certainly had some fucking digging to do in 2022 when I'm being told we're at the height of state-condoned violence on menial grounds for free religious practice. Certainly has nothing to do with skin color. Could be dead serious there. How many of you intellectual, non-religious, identifying asswipes scoffed inwardly at the mention of that man's offerings to his church? Bastards. Worse, how many of you Christians theists scoffed at the mention of his Pentecostal affiliation. Don't even venture to feed me no goddamn nonsense either about giving Caesar what is Caesar's. Pretty positive it was your precious Jeebus that had some quote about serving two masters, so where the fuck you at, moral majority? Where the fucking shit hell is that fucking prosperity gospel now, you disgusting piles of shit out the asses of maggots? Where is your fucking Christian nation amongst the fucking any of my examples? Where is your fucking Christian nation amongst fucking any of my examples? Hellacious, malicious, insane prodigies of fucking monkeys that happily desire to have us act in such a fashion. Nicotine. Tetrahydrocannabinol. Immediately. Does it never occur to many of you whom claim the evidence of our God-fearing forefathers as support for the basis of church entwined with state, that it was this very reason that gave these religious founders the personal understanding of how such a structure suspiciously appeared at the heart of so much inhumane, authoritative injustice? So many stories of the real average men and women fleeing to this country place the blame on religious persecution, not from Muslims, or atheists, or Hindus, or whatever, but the very Christians that shared the commandment to call each other brother, let alone the heathens they were told to call neighbor. Restated, the persecution was usually dealt out on the order of a similarly Christian institution. Alas, I've allowed frustration to fuel my tendency to hyperfocus and spout foolishness. I haven't even gotten to toddler rant about the credit system, or the accounting infrastructure, or tech industries. I would find myself most reprehensible, even revolting, for failing to give the credit owed to the entertainment industry, and the psychological impacts its physical embodiment coincidentally parallels the topics I've stated or hinted at. I'm not even sure where to begin with such a behemoth of a topic, though. Interestingly, TYT also facilitated the realization of the acquired power by the options for escapism coinciding with problematic consequences for those lacking in wealth. Oi. You know, I swear I knew of a survey result showing state by state the highest wage employee, and long story short, the conclusions seem to indicate that a majority of states valued pro-level athletes, coaches, owners, over... No, I'll wait on this subject. The study doesn't seem to exist, or it was a hoax like that stupid crime statistic. Just something I liked, making it easier to swallow. I feel at times like the greatest, simplest, and yet thought-provoking lyrics I've had the pleasure to hear is the chorus of Jim Crochet's Operator. But isn't that the way they say it goes? Well, let's forget all that, and give me the number if you can find it, so I can call just to tell 'em I'm fine, and to show I've overcome the blow. I've learned to take it well. I only wish my words could convince me. Could just convince myself that it just wasn't real. But that's not the way it feels. With the love of music I've constantly held dear, you'd think the industry would have been the first reality check to rip the blinders off of this shady dealings of the infrastructure that exists to publicize art. I hate to be an ass about it, but hip-hop didn't write the book on exploiting their artists and influence to talk civilians out of sustenance, apologies, money. Hell, rock and roll didn't either, and I wrote a damn 10-page paper on the subject in junior high. That was rife with mentions of the corporate sectors pulling the strings. I look back thinking, how did all of that just slap me about the face, and I just go, huh, fascinating. Fucking dumbass. A little harsh, but my focus was weighted too heavily at proving a meaningless point. that the Beatles were the true kings of rock and roll. A silly hill to die on that I happily defended till I finally became totally apathetic. While I was enthralled by the newfound genre of heavy metal, I held a special place for the While I was enthralled by the newfound genre of heavy metal, I held a special place for the Beatles from my early youth, where the pool of media to partake of was heavily censored. The combination of their beats, notes, and lyrics, whether arbitrary or engrossing relatable, were not only what I saw made a real rock and roll band singing rock music, but combined with what popularity they commanded, made them the unrecognized greatest of all time. Elvis, of course, being the more commonly held pinnacle, around me at least. Greatest of all time, the GOAT. What an imbecilic, boisterous load of horseney that ever became a thing. Fans of whatever artist compiling their lists of attributes that support their fever fantasy of how their guy meets the criteria. The statement is far too subjective, even when desperately attempting to associate the conclusion on facts. At the time of writing that paper, I was also a maggot. Meaning there was no greater band, dead, living, or yet to come, than Slipknot, and no equal talent to their frontman, Corey Taylor. He could literally do everything vocal related, and combined with the supreme talents on the instrumentals, I still have those first 3 albums Corey joined Slipknot amongst my absolute favorite pieces of all time. Every time I pick one up, I feel almost compelled to listen to them all the way through. Each song excellent and unique, and the messages of hate and revenge were close to the heart. The group was just another mention alongside other idolized musicians like Judas Priest, Lamb of God, Iron Maiden, and Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids in the paper, mostly in hopes that I could kill some stereotypes about the Satanist-worshipping, evil-loving, violence-inspiring, no-talent hacks that could only smash on their instruments fast while one yelled, screamed in a microphone. I believe I threw the paper in the trash when enlightenment took a baseball bat to my brain listening to Volume 3, The Subliminal Verses, for the God knows what repetitious time. In my crazed mind's eye, I connected my feelings about the album having single hits for the first time as the selling out of my band. Whether this outlook led to my disillusion or that they did just cease playing fast-paced notes with fuck everyone lyrics from a place of authenticity, I stopped placing them on a god-tier pedestal and brought it down to earth, focusing on the undeniable talent, and that was evident, even if not incomparable, unmatched. The attraction felt towards lyrics that resonate with personal experience isn't special, and my desire to escape, placate my mind encouraged me to imagine a bond between the artists and myself. Others heard hate, rage, or at best, loud, incoherent noises, and I wanted to show others what my ears received and how I interpreted it. At least to me, the message garnered gave feelings of peace, calm, joy, while simultaneously providing focus and energy. It never stops. You can't be everything to everyone. Contagion. I'm sitting at the side of Satan, What do you want from me? They never told me the failure I was meant to be. Overdo it, don't tell me you blew it. Stop your bitching and fight your way through it. I'm not like you, I just fuck up. Come on, motherfucker, everybody has to die. Come on, motherfucker, everybody has to die. Still gets the blood pumping, but reminiscing over people equal shit couldn't cease my being pissed off over the band I loved only raging because they were poor. Literally all the bands I had tried to cover in my paper. My existing excess of malicious intent needed an outlet, and I had already gotten over the torturing small critters shit. The fuckers hadn't ever done anything that gave rise to my desires of fire, blood, and pain, and I settled in my mind that they could feel. All were alive down to the smallest insect and plant, even single-celled organism. I detested random wanton violence. I only sought vengeance, but was too stupid to conjure a satisfactory method to exact it that didn't place me amongst serial killers, meaning in a cell or the ground. The relief I found in hard rock heavy metal put my thoughts out in the air, and hearing it, I would smile, maybe laugh aloud, scolding my silly overreaction to a mundane issue. Of course, I could easily be substituting logic to explain some simple emotion as I like fast heavy bass, and there's no denying that accusation when discerning the qualities of recognized legends, one-hit wonders, niche counterculturists. Many points presented as fact are subjective. Say that or any critiques in front of someone uplifted, motivated by the medium scrutinized, and gloves off. The devotee can hardly be blamed in my eyes when the criticism usually seems to be aimed at the supporter of the creator, artists themselves, or felt as such if commentary towards the popular figure is unjust. Wouldn't you agree, Rap God? I will attempt to keep this brief. Too many shitheads seem desperate to throw stones at the man, making it difficult to discern whose iterations come from a desire to cease hero worship or capitalize off the attention his name tows with it. The issues seem awfully similar to my hang-ups with Old Abe. That being, even the honest ones are overly sympathetic toward another equally at fault. Turnabout is fair play, I believe. I think the saying goes. Marshall Mathers ain't some Elvis clone. The accusations of culture vulture has become insanely common from where I sit, and it would have me rolling if I didn't see it as a serious roadblock for discussing the actual problem. Part of the thing I regret about that rock and roll paper was my defense of Elvis. I was too ignorant, and insufficient time had been spent to put nuance into context. Oh sure, I was after his throne to give to another, but he wasn't the mastermind of his success, or even his own songs. The label, publication, and agency companies funding and pushing his music took a pretty-faced 16-year-old and waved money in his face. From what I've read, Elvis wasn't exactly gifted academically or athletically, nor described as a creative innovator before getting offered by others the chance to raise him and his family out of poverty. Boy, I wish I could go back and physically hear the wind going over my head as I ever so briefly touched on his puppet masters before forging ahead. I was only focused on the mediocre talent and effort compared to the pedestal I placed the Beatles on, and my refutation of how he was considered the king solely due to popularity restated his throne was just the sheer number of individuals who verbalized the sentiment. Die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you're an Elvis clone in all the worst ways, Marsh. The main thing I hear is how swinging his hips to a quickened blues beat spurred his rise, but I would argue it was the ability to relate with that beat to the poor majority, not just the black Americans amongst them. A symbol to those who empathized with the plight of totalitarianism felt by blacks, despite sharing the master's color. Can you claim much different, M? It's like my mother always told me. Ranny, 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 and codeine, and goddammit, you little motherfucker. If you ain't got nothing nice to say, then don't say nothing. Oh, fuck that shit, bitch, eat a motherfucking dick, chew on a prick, and lick a million motherfucking cocks per second. I'd rather put out a motherfucking gospel record. I'd rather be a pussy-whipped bitch, eat pussy, and have pussy lips glued to my face with a clit ring in my nose. If I had a quarter for every time I heard if you have nothing nice to say, then say nothing at all. Clever sounding way to silence dissent, but if conversations were just a string of insults, I don't see how it would result in progress. I doubt I'm alone either. Parents love the song and dance used by their parents, and lyrics like that inspire a sense of camaraderie, of shared suffering. So fucking what? If all these fucks are just rehashing shit we've all been through, what good has it brought us? I mean, for real, you respond that way to your mother, Marshall, when staring down douchey authoritarianism disguised as wit. How about the bosses? And even if you did, that magically solve the reason for the interaction to begin with? You've been played like a fiddle, using what talent and will are at your disposal to find security for yourself and loved ones, increasing the wealth of those who play the game of our livelihoods. But I'm not throwing ones, fives, tens, or even 20s. I'm throwing quarters, nickels, dimes, pennies up at Skinny's. Man, I do this for them bunnies up at Denny's, from the north, east, and west, but when it comes to them trailers in them South Parks, muffle it, 'cause homie, that hood's tighter than Kenny's. So ladies, if your belly button's not an innie, then I'm outie. Now hop in my minivan, let's get rowdy, come on. Honestly, I struggle to think you truly comprehend any longer about the fear constantly thrown at the populace as topics of controversy to encourage our sacrifice of self-governing. Your actions place you right alongside the pricks I hold the most accountable for the despair in this world. Now I'm just being a fuckstick for no reason. Look at these rappers, how I eat 'em. Look at these rappers, how I treat 'em. See why the fuck, why... Take 3, Christopher. Look at these rappers, how I treat 'em. So why the fuck would I join 'em when I beat 'em? They call me a freak 'cause I like to spit on these pussies 'fore I eat 'em. Man, get these whack cocksuckers off the stage. Where the fuck is Kanye when you need him? I inspire the Hobsons, the Logics, the Coles, the Shawns, the K-Dots, the 5-9s, and brought the world 50 cent. You did what? Squat, piss and moan. But I'm not gonna fall, bitch. Fucking Christ, it's hard not to accuse you of just jumping on bandwagons to stay relevant, the consequences being more power to those who fashion themselves experts, savvy, or simply just responsible for your continued economic safety. Where's the mentions for Tech Nine, or strange music artists in general, or Crazy Bone, Twista, Brother Lynch Hung, Mystical, whatever, rambling, because you have, not really talking to you anymore. Point being, yes, obviously you have an incredible way with words, and by all accounts a courteous, driven demeanor. You're not special. You're only unique because there is no other Marshall Mathers. You don't bring shit to the table that 1,000 others haven't. 1,000 others haven't brought, been bringing or will bring themselves. Again, exactly the same as your predecessors. Soon as realization of status starts to set in, the fuck everything message gotta go. Double talk and moral high grounds replace trash talking and silly offensive metaphors, because all that nonsense now applies to you in some way. I wonder if that acknowledgement and the rejection of it was what inspired Elvis to seek drugs and die on a shitter. My discontent lies in the same place it's always been. The alternating standard, the ever-changing bar. Before I fold, I'ma die first. Won't adapt unless you diverse. Trying to catch a wave of my tears, lately all I ate are my words. Clear straight roads never made great drivers. Chasing the American dream is giving me nightmares. I see the rocket's red glare, bombs bursting in the air, and they try to tell me it's fireworks. Those lyrics come from possibly my favorite hip-hop rap album by two artists I find skilled and enjoyable. I can't say Stevie Stone is the greatest lyricist, singer, or raps over the best beats. Hell, probably not even top 10 through the gauntlet of characteristics. But him and JL put out an album that I listen to front to back, no skips, almost every time a song off the album pops on my Pandora radio. Stevie also has multiple albums with a majority of songs I find enjoyable, as well as featuring on songs I think are another artist's strongest showing. I want to say it's his voice, but maybe I'm just a home team fanboy. Cess Crew, Kriz, Big Scoob, King ISO, Cut Calhoun. I mean, where are all the neo-civil rights, culture warrior, hip-hop acolytes be for these talented, gifted lyricists, musicians, artists? Every single one mentioned and more. Oi, stay focused, Chris. But first, it's not like I only care about these mentions. Artists like Hyro the Hero, Immortal Technique, Afro, Khan, Daddy Fat Snaps don't get the recognition deserved. I am not just male simping here. Yes, my violent inclinations and overwhelming angst skews my tastes away from the romantic, lyrically dominated state female artists seem to be encouraged to write, sing on. But I still bump those like Missy Elliott, Trina, Snow the Product, Angel Hayes, and Flo Milli. Okay, now that all that previous shit is off my chest, let's return to what I just hinted at with my shot at the female music industry. You, Marshall, just like every artist in any field, is an Elvis clone. The only reason I specifically reject you as one lies in the labels we love throwing at each other only fills the coffers of the handlers. Controversy in all its forms aren't new to even recent events involving the business of music. Butcher Pete's got a long, sharp knife. He starts chopping and don't know when to stop. All you fellas gotta watch your wives, 'cause Pete don't care whose meat he chops. The police put Pete in jail. Yes, he finally met his fate. But when they came to pay his bail, they found him chopping up his cellmate. None of you are as clever as you think, but you're encouraged to think so by those who suck your assholes to get a piece of the pie, and those who make the dish just demand your ingredients to feed you all. For your own good, of course. I mean, doesn't seem like many of you are certified public accountants, lawyers, professors, doctors. You're gonna manage the equipment, production, storage, distribution, labor, advertising, etc. for your album solo. Oh my goodness. I said manage. I meant do. Manage still implies others accomplishing the direct tasks for you. I'm throwing shade when you're just mimicking the accolades preset by forms of entertainment like fiction, theater, and comedy. I'm right there with anyone who wants to say Elvis was a pawn, to those exploiting a variety of popular themes combined in the singer to increase their influence while controlling the rights and production. The only names I should fucking hear in relation to him or Eminem alongside the words culture vultures are those like Jimmy Iovine, Leor Cohen, Paul Rosenberg, Andre Young, Sam Phillips, Thomas Parker, Gene and Julian Auerbach. This here was all in a dream. Everything's getting complicated as it would have seemed. Niggas was stressed out. The rent's due, a couple checks bounced. I was looking for something to test out. Criminal. I don't usually want the style, but now circumstances have got me on the prowl. I mean, how up in the late night you can check the shit out, and when I see the bait bite, voices were saying to me. I love our ideas of freedom of speech, but so do these rat-spawned fuckfaces gibbly signing off on emotional outbursts just so long as it doesn't hurt their pockets. Just like so many innovations, language is a tool, and what it does is actually what we do with it. Those of power, prominence, popularity, prosperity have always been somewhere in the scenes for forms of escapism, even back when all that existed was sports and the jesters, caves and soot. I think it's about time I whine about Freud, because I got far more than 99 problems, and that bitch is involved in all of them. Esteros and Yalahila and I Esteros, Yalahila, and I had a wide variety of music tastes, but a common resentment of our insane, zealous upbringings was a strong mutual bond, and most of the music was the blanket genre of rock and roll, which meant for every unique song there was a mutually loved tune also. Esteros was the more talented, if speaking of the performance aspect, excellent on the guitar, and he talked us into attempting a heavy metal band. Encouraged by the immense joy the animated comedy Metalocalypse brought to our poor little apartment, and my ability to growl, we came up with the name Messianic Massacre, and for a year or two we made serious progress. Esteros not only played multiple instruments, but some classical training gave him a mind for song structure that was crucial when trying to work around my weirdness as a vocalist lyricist. Early 2010s GarageBand on a MacBook wasn't exactly cutting-edge technology either. Multiply, divide, conquer. Thin your lines and be defeated. Controlled cookie-cutter cottages containing spaces needing heated. Our filthy fucking politicians spinning filthy fucking lies. You eat their hypocritical bullshit, and I don't fucking sympathize. Plague, infection, everywhere. Fills the pews and doesn't care. Doesn't heal the cancer festering in your mind. Listen to your politician lest Satan claims your lives. I don't follow viral prophets. I just paint the fucking walls. Thank your gods from death exempt you, while sucking on our fucking balls. Our will towards further knowledge, cocksuckers sly to cull. Shepherds of their plague, fuckers in control. Corrupt the yuppies, sons and daughters, cleansed in water, fire, sell your soul. Viscous ore, collective gore, casted faces hollow, begging more. Cantripped accusations with intangible collaborations cast a pall upon us all, from bird to worm that crawl. Sadists spurring insurrections bent on living building ball. Fire the hatch, admire the craft. Blow out your brain, right into the grain. Darkness is free, why can't you all see? Just give your soul to me. Die, incinerate, unfabricate, obliterate. Die, erode to dust, corrosive husk, your life is bust. Die, receive the fade, and be unmade, your carcass has been spayed. Pandemic, apocalypse, empty souls paying tolls, blackened by eclipse. You gladly drink their acid, ingest yourself made placid, inhaling illusion, addict to confusion, insisting masticating shit, they edict mass execute. They edict mass execution. So one last suggestion, a small little question. Your life, do you look at with spite? Cut some slack, folks. I was barely in my 20s when I created that, and despite my love to write, a poet I am not. I tried to warn Esteros beforehand, but I should have never underestimated him. I know I would bump that shitty metal song to this day if we ever got the band off the ground. Fucking funny, reading it after these last years. If I didn't hold a firm opinion about Sears, might even be shocked about my own words. Obviously not a prophet. I don't have any friends in high places or with inside info, and even if I believed my mother about my IQ test results, 120-ish is not, by any stretch of the imagination, astounding. I fucking wrote that shit in early 2012, during Obama's administration, and despite whatever similes, parallels are extracted from it, there's nothing new. Nothing special contained in those stupid alliterations. Fuck, I'm never going to stay on topic. Anyway, we never actually made the band official, as a true disagreement couldn't be compromised to a satisfactory solution. Probably pretty blatant at this point, but I hold immense disapproval for profit motives. On the other hand, Esteros had a much more practical, realistic view, being that without some form of financial backing, the music thing wasn't going to work. After deciding on the song with the best lyrical structure, he cranked out some instrumentals, and then we did our first rough copy. It was better than we could have ever dreamed. Both of us now excited, Esteros wanted to ship the sample to Sony and get the ball rolling to make us legit. Sony, being a big record company, could provide assistance on all the nuanced, droll tasks that must be accomplished outside just making the music. I, having a hard-on for corporate fuckery even then, had a lot of reservations. Don't get me wrong, PlayStation till I die, but that's me using their shit for escapism. This was actually, let's just be honest, I felt that was my shit, and I would be thrice damned in a hell I don't believe in before I trusted a giant company to do right by us with our art, especially if it did blow up. Who can really say if that was the best route? Sure, we never got a try at superstardom or even comfortable rock status, but we also started to cease the suffocating insanity of poverty brought on by our focus on subjects that did not involve pumping out dollar bills for the country's daddies. Who knows if Esteros would have finished college otherwise, overcome addiction and reliance on pharmaceuticals, and moved on with Yalahila to find enjoyment in life. Being young, repressed adults finally away from the ever-watching eye, none of us had derogatory thoughts on the use of drugs. Instead, we acknowledged the individual potential for addiction and the desire it caused, leading to increasingly destructive behavior. Estros probably had the greatest disadvantage at such a trial, possibly due to his family winning the award for most financially stable amongst us. Yalohila and I had always tried to play our emotions close to the chest, worried of what repercussions were possible for letting others get a glimpse of the strange thoughts we entertained. Estros, whether his parents had money to burn or just cared more, got the joys of psychoanalysis from a young age for the slightest out-of-norm act, at least how I interpreted the recollection. He spent more time with a therapist than Yalohila and I, which led to beliefs I found trippy, for a lack of a better word. He had to deal with manic depression, ADHD, and I believe some other shit, but memory's a bit fuzzy. The therapists he had seen sounded like good people, but they all had their own take on what method was needed to fix the host of stressors weighing on him. Armed with money and prescriptions, his last few years of schooling before our accommodations was a whole different experience to what Yalohila and I went through. She from a rural public school and I a private school, Estros had commanded an air of extroverted joy that was naturally magnetic, but he chalked it up to the chemicals his doctors told him to take. This didn't faze the two of us at all, and proved day in, day out we could care less about the drugs. Estros was a bit taken aback from this, as his experience had taught him that almost everybody was just looking to get high and have fun. Being constantly reminded of his misgivings by parents, teachers, and doctors alike, he had developed a habit of abusing his ADHD medication and, from what I understand, with just ADHD alone instilling a tendency towards certain drugs, this wasn't uncommon. I mean, for most people, Yalohila included, who doesn't like a bit of a pick-me-up. This guy right here didn't. I still prefer downers to this day, because I never felt like I had any lack of wakefulness. In fact, just the opposite. We were all a bit goth, meaning all of us leaned a little into the macabre. Yalohila and I overwhelmingly so over Estros. Both of us considered ourselves serial killers without a kill count. Yet, and whether one of us was a psychopath and or sociopath was just semantics for professors on the origin for a desire to destroy. I swear we found a different definition for the two terms every time we researched it during a debate. We loved our horror movies. The worse, the gorier, the better. Estros probably stopped wondering if we actually were that fucked up after a couple years of dealing with our fascination on the perverse. We all had a bit screwy with us, but only Estros had the credentials. And while he always commented on how impressed he was on the methods I discussed for subduing my insanity without letting another human take the reins, I don't think he was nearly as impressed as I was when, supposedly partly from my advice and support, he completely kicked all of his prescriptions. Nothing worth having ever comes easy. The hardship of trying to correct the bad habits of abusing his medicine seemed minuscule when I watched him take the path to clean his body entirely. Yalohila was incredibly supportive, and who I think helped, if anyone other than myself. My sound bites were just vibrations in the air. I probably wouldn't be so harsh on myself if it wasn't for the familiar bittersweet taste in the mouth as I watched him fight, persevere, and correct the unwanted characteristics of self. I was reliving my cousin taking his place amongst the priesthood all over again. They would continue to progress, as I previously mentioned, even quitting cigarettes before moving to the coast for Esteros to finish his higher education. Meanwhile, here I am, just turned 33 years old, college dropout, deadbeat dad, chain smoker, procrastinator, still raving like a lunatic, but now recognizing I have no conclusion. I hated even thinking it, and I don't believe I ever stated it aloud, even to them, as even when it would randomly occur in my mind, I felt it a sick, insane attempt at flexing over an abhorrent mindset. But I always felt a step closer to full-blown murder than the two of them. Ultimately, this is what led to our final parting, in which they eventually left the Midwest for a fresh start. I knew most of the right things to say and do, and as much as I thought it was impossible, I felt remorse and hurt when I moved out our rental house. I had always talked about owning my own place, and it was the excuse I used in the third time I decided to move away from them. True, I wasn't saving money like I wanted, as I stated to them, and yes, being the one with the cash to actually care for the house affairs could feel a bit one-sided. Reality is, I was losing the battle with sanity. As I continued to kid myself that I was in control with the help of my weed, I discovered that cleaning was no different than mental health. I had fooled myself, excusing my silly introspection as effort enough, and eventually I began to pay the price for sweeping dust under the rug. During the time I was working in Leavenworth, shortly after my girlfriend and I split, I would get that ticket and probation leading to no weed for a year. No problem, I'll just drink a little at night to help myself sleep. Weed's not a physical addiction, so I'll be fine. Just have the mental shackles ready for an enraged beast. How in the fuck synthetic weed was ever legal, and yet we still make the stupidest fucking arguments on a fucking plant that you technically don't need to do shit to other than burn is beyond my comprehension. 6 months into my probation, I was starting to have the nightmares return, and it was intensely worse than I'd given them credit for previously. I decided to give the synthetic stuff some buddies brought by a shot, as I had dabbled a little bit when it was with it during poorer times, and that experience gave me a false impression that maybe it was less a drug than I talked shit on it about when stacking it against the real thing. No. Drug. For me. Bad drug. Don't know what was different about that stuff, but the most intense body high hit me like a baseball bat. Worst, my body was trying to convince me to use that pent energy to grab the axe hidden behind my chair and hack everyone to pieces. My mind at war with itself. I might have cried a warning if I were capable. Instead, I sat locked on my lazy boy trying to clear my mind, white-knuckling the armrests as the axe was far too ready, and I dared not to listen to the conversations going on around me for fear of losing my concentration. I don't really know how, but I made it through the peak, desperately holding on to what Esteros had said when we dropped acid the first time. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, no matter what you feel, and especially whatever thoughts are spawned, it's technically in your head, and you can prevent it from consuming you. Just know your limits. After making it through, I swore I would never take a chemical I couldn't verify in recreational amounts, unless around the closest of friends I could trust with my darkest traits. Albeit, the damage was already done. I can't blame K2 or whatever it was, and I really don't want to blame weed itself. However, after my time with the justice system was up, not much time passed before compounding stressors brought on new symptoms to my malady. I didn't dream of torture, heinous rape, murder, destruction, suicide any longer. Instead, they began to infest my waking thoughts. Demented daydreams that overwhelmed me randomly if I became lost in thought. Obsessed with choice and its pathways, I would set about meditating on past events, personal and popular, up to the present, and wind my way down a variety of potential outcomes to prepare myself. Unfortunately, I found with increasing frequency I would consistently force myself awake from addictive fantasizing about the hell on earth I could bestow on someone. And worse, that individual could have yet to even take the action that led to the musings. A couple of times the human didn't even exist. I would abandon Leavenworth, hoping to escape what I thought was me losing my grip, again making bullshit excuses to those around me, and once more seeking the companionship of Esteros and Yalohila, who I felt cared and understood my plight better than any other being. Nothing had changed, though, and I do mean nothing. It would take years to bear fruit, my stubborn ass too ignorant to accept It would take years to bear fruit, my stubborn ass too ignorant to accept the cloud shadowing my every action. I desperately wanted the rest of my life spent with the joy of their company, except the pleasantry was lost. I imagine all of us get that feeling of exasperation with those we share significant time around, and as they began to be the objects of my daymares, I knew I had to leave. I was the problem. So I achieved the pinnacle of worthless millennial, moving back in with the parents. 30-year-old man living in mommy and daddy's basement on top of all the other cockamamie horse ninny. I had finally reached my potential. Fuck. I mean, if I was gonna lose it, might as well be on those I felt it was justified. Yeah, all you fatherfuckers talking like you, my daddy, trying to sun me and shit. Still want a piece of that classification? Keep going with it. I'm more than happy to rack up a couple surrogates before the real primary target. While I did feel it necessary, I had drastically underestimated the wave of apathy and depression that swallowed me returning to the existential genesis of my negativity. Felt like I was a teenager once more. Since I had never desired or allowed a professional of mental health to have a crack at me, I was left to find my own ways to deal with any behaviors of thought I needed to correct to be happy, normal. Self-prescribed weed and cigarettes, hobbies I loved, music, and definitely video games were the crutches long relied on to support my progress on destroying hated desires. Part of the struggle to save money came from my love of video games, like stated. I could black out the entirety of life when engaged with strategy-based entertainment. Of course, some of the most available, convenient, innovative versions appear on that wonderful multitasking smartphone. Not ready to prove that I'm actually some fucked up version of the greatest generation trapped in a millennial's body. I couldn't do it anyway, as any time depression, anxiety, nihilism would get too potent. I would blow any money I felt extra on those stupid mobile games, proven time and time again to suffer from all the same think-tank processing on business conduct. Part of my reasoning for leaving the roommates came from the hope that by removing the object of my horrific fantasies, I would find the will to refuse shooting myself in the foot economically. I imagine you guessed that it didn't work. I fucked myself, and that just made it a habit for repetition. I slowly ramped up the pathetic display of hedonism with throwing money at silly microtransactions almost all varieties of mobile games are equipped with to progress. It was never the same game. I would spend all my extra money seemingly on health, dental, or vehicle-related expenses for a while, not saving shit, then get upset about that, start saving money, then get fucking pissed about that, and find a mobile game to distract myself. The cycle begins at this point where I would get involved with the mechanics, admiring whatever effort I felt I recognized, I got involved with individuals like myself going through life looking for a little respite, finding further joy in bonding with a group and heartache as those with the big pockets, guns, show up to swing their big dicks around. Then I start throwing the money I've saved, leading to the realization of if I'm going to spend this money, there's real shit pertinent to living I should direct it towards. And I quit the game. That game. I couldn't seem to break the cycle until my dumbass realized I hadn't truly attempted any other actions to impede my poor habit, just like the old days. The only recourse was to find another distraction, and after some time of treating cash like excrement, I settled on sex. During the last few years, I had ceased looking for a companion. I didn't want to try to facilitate a relationship hoping that I could trust the partner with full honesty, only to reach a crossroads where one of us no longer desired the company of the other. I would just go about my routine activities, and if a chick actually thought I was attractive enough to date, it would be obvious and I wouldn't look gift horse in the mouth. Of course, it would have to be very blatant, as I'm oblivious, and that's not exactly the mannerisms, even in 2022. We encourage of the female sex. While self-analyzing my destructive tendencies, I realized that I wasn't engaging in any platonic, romantic, or just straight sexual activity. I had stepped up cig and weed smoking, and I couldn't keep $1 to my name. The first course of action I settled on was a sex doll. If I could save my money to afford a decent one and never touch another microtransaction again, I would allow myself the indignity of a fancy cum rag. Needless to say, can't hate on the results. Of course, the real thing is better, but that requires a real human being. And I was getting really bored with my hand. Alas, it would take a bit longer to start saving anything. Bunch of bullshit. I.e., thought I would walk out on my job, still hardly any teeth in my head, ridiculous list of weird medical burps no one takes seriously, my vehicle hardly going 2 months without throwing codes. You know, whine, complain. Getting way off the beaten path here. While my silly attempt seemed uncorrelated to the compatibility of saving, it was indeed successful. The problems of holding back funds drew from multiple causes, but my inability to find peace so as to continue this nonsense was quelled. I told you I was going to shit all over Sigmund Freud. Have you heard how so far? Fucking Christ. Almost at 200 pages now. I got a bad feeling my writing will get uglier. Just no shame, Chris. Alright. My parents know of the cigarettes and weed use, but I keep them in the dark as much as possible on the nuance as laid out prior. And I certainly wouldn't normally out Lilitha, not just for the repressed nature of their thoughts on sexuality, but the intense proclivity placed on financial gain. Never stated in such words, instead taking the form of long-held traditions or institutions, but the hypocrisy is just as depressing as the feeling of living with my roommates in the apartment era. How on earth I developed a desire for attention to detail, absolute perseverance regardless of environment, letting my mind speak instead of my mouth, all those and more that they supposedly held as the standard, when the physical demonstrations from said teachers rarely matched the bullshit issuing from their throats. I understand all too well. Can I communicate it is the question. The depressing part of all of this is the self-discovery providing no relief, improvement, despite all the careful repetition. I mean, I'm not even going as far as I did for my fellows, Esteros and Yalahila, where I would get every nook and cranny, underneath furniture, ceilings, maybe cook a meal for us all, lots of dishes. But yeah, fuck my parents. You ain't getting shit as the ones who, what's the cliche, lead by example. Though I'm probably just a disgruntled degenerate obsessed with the fetishizing of lingerie and blowjobs, leaving me one of them incels or whatever. Comical as even now 8 cigs in the 4 hours I've been awake, I would still classify that simple fetish as the only addiction I actually can't control. Wow, I'm a lost ball in high weeds. Let's continue writing with my skull, not my head. I still can't find the acceptance, forgiveness to act the way I feel I should at all times while in their presence, even though there's nothing special about them warranting my obstinance. They only know the shit they've been taught in the same manners they passed on, no different than any human being on this planet. Every day brings new levels of apathy over humanity's bass-ackwards methods. She says that she's thinking of reproductive rights 1 minute from having a baby. This is about as perverse a notion as I could possibly imagine. That as you're about to have your child, you're thinking, boy, wouldn't it be great if I could still kill this baby? What I care about is not killing babies. It's not aborting a fetus. It's not getting rid of a ball of tissue. It's not a matter of women's rights to choose. A slave owner didn't get to choose to hold slaves. Nazis didn't get to decide which Jews got to live. Literally the most innocent among us, we treat the killing of these human beings as nothing more than just an issue of convenience and choice and all the rest. I wish to God that Mike Pence would have said that instead of citing the Bible. I think the Bible is right, but I don't think the Bible is the important textbook here. I think what's important here is the science. Ben Shapiro destroys the abortion argument. Oh yes, let's get cracking. Above was some reactions from Shapiro at an infomercial put out by Olivia Wilde on reproductive rights, or as Ben loved putting it, killing fully formed children and individual human beings. I find these points a bit off the mark, and I'll explain. You support our Second Amendment, but a gun is just a tool, and all tools require knowledge, wisdom, and physical training to recognize how and when its utilization is not only acceptable, but truly necessary. The whole video is riddled with the nuance and details supporting the value of the life of a human being, no matter the stage of development. But they're not positioned as a rebuttal to the nuance and details glossed over of the ideology you seek to show as false. With such an example, one can easily demolish our right to bear arms, as these tools serve no other purpose but to take life. Sure, we love to play games with the boomsticks. Some of us find pleasure in the engineering, but even if not a human one, at the end of the day, a gun's only purpose is to reach out some length of distance and take life. The target games just play second fiddle. What should be a method of training to ensure that the dangers of recklessness, poor luck, don't result in accidents seem to have devolved to a point of showmanship and defense against perceived insults of liberty. Yet these realities don't negate the other facts either. I find it insanely difficult to push aside indignation as you brushed off planning, comprehension, and the capability to teach and provide for another individual human being as a matter of choice and convenience. When owning a gun, it's imperative you know the moving parts, where the business end is, how to transport, package, and store. One needs the finances to practice in a contained area, to provide the resources for the tool's function, as well as the time for the previously mentioned and further basic maintenance for a precision instrument. Do not all these apply in some fashion to the rearing of a civilian? What life would I have given a child if, despite my shitty job, atheistic beliefs, and poor understanding of social interactions, I hopped in with the rest of the salmon to swim with the school and said that's my child, I gotta be a man and raise it. Better question, do you think humans like Alois and Clara, Alois? Alos. Alois and Clara Hitler, Michael and Ann Higgins, Lionel and Joyce Dahmer, Pauline and Seymour Epstein should have had no other option but to raise the consequences of sharing their commandment of marriage. Perhaps you hold the environmental, socio-economic status or personal behaviors as the perpetrator for the events that would play out. Or maybe you'd say the sins of the father and all that jazz, except reverse, as it's the sins of the offspring. Did the lives their progeny would end equate to the justification of their spawn's existence to begin with? Or did these evildoers' own lives become forfeit only at the moment of taking another's? The lives of the parents prior. At some level, you do understand that so many of the contentious beliefs of how we live require a level of deliberation and discussion. If you say that the only schools that are allowed to receive funding are non-religious schools, then you are effectively violating freedom of religion by discriminating against schools that are religious. It's very silly to say that you should be allowed to use your voucher for some sort of secular school, the idea being that secular schools sort of the default, but not for a religious school of your choosing. Nothing wrong with the government directly funding religious schools if they're funding not religious schools. If they're funding Jewish and Catholic schools, that is obviously not religious discrimination. It seems the Supreme Court is now moving in the direction of what we call the Utah Rule. It has a very expansive non-discrimination law, but it has religious exemptions. It has a broad religious carve-out. Whenever there is some sort of major national catastrophe and then legislatures jump into the fray to solve the problem, very often they do more harm than good. Somebody who's actually demonstrating full-scale threatening behavior. The idea of a red flag law is not bad. The problem is how to enforce. One of the problems with an extreme protection order is that it's enforced without actually the ability to rebut right away. The minute you start passing gun legislation on the basis of terrible things happening, well, next time a terrible thing happens, they'll push more gun regulation, and you will just pass that gun legislation as well. One of the problems with an extreme protection order is that it's enforced without actually the ability to rebut right away. The minute you start passing gun legislation on the basis of terrible things happening, well, next time a terrible thing happens, they'll push more gun legislation, and you will just pass that gun legislation as well. Just horrific action by this police department and no amount of additional funding to red flag laws is going to fix that. The Return of Religious Freedom, episode 1520. Why do you defend the principle of gun ownership when the answer is incredibly obvious as not killing babies? Yes, if you take all the guns and weapons except from those permitted to hold a license, the populace no longer has a means of defense against those individuals who desire to take their freedoms by force. But those who wish such evil actions upon their peers now stand out like a sore thumb, do they not? Is not this the reason for criminalizing abortion? Once we recognize the injustice of ending the growth of cells into a birthed human as the murder it is, legislation isolates those willing to risk the action, inhibits the free exchange of knowledge as to the proper procedures and safe practices pre- and post-up the operation. Businesses and law enforcement cooperate to track those acquiring the equipment to even attempt the now criminal act. You mean to say that these measures and others applied to the owning of a gun wouldn't have drastically altered the events of Robb Elementary?
You scoffed at the idea of playing the joints for discussing religious litigation, and your stance on abortion supports such, but are not the arguments for states' rights on gun control by individual citizens and freedom of speech for business entities a form of this very principle? The dream of religious freedom is held by the followers of many religions, but every organized religion at its core holds that their form of faith, their traditions and teachings, hold the fundamentally correct answers for a human's way of life. The founders of this country didn't have to be historians to see the pattern of the combination of outlawed weaponry with a religion at the side of the state, making it the religion, leading to... No, you read that with passion. Stop it. The founders of this country didn't have to be historians to see the pattern of the combination of outlawed weaponry with a religion at the side of the state, making it the religion, leading to, at best, a state of persecution for the disenfranchised, and, at worst, state-sanctioned theft, adultery, and murder. So how far does a secular nation go to prevent the suffering of its civilians under a delegated denomination, and establish the safety of its populace to follow any religion they choose, even if that be none? Which, you admit to the exemptions, gun rights are a privilege, and fucking up in a certain way removes that privilege. If you're dangerous to yourself or others, we're not gonna just give you a gun. Well, sometimes, but that's how the cookie crumbles. So often, history's greatest atrocities revolve around a sanctioned individual acting under their own nefarious intent against those who feel powerless to stand against them. Why else try and protect an individual's right to own an equalizer? The way I see it, the contentious nature of even allocating funds towards a religious institution stems from the humans allocating the finances, sending that money to other sapiens who now spend the money for the progression of their livelihoods. If there is no oversight or legal ramifications for the conglomerate, the growth of those outside their group is inhibited. Other civilians lose their rights lest they seek another method for openly, honestly carrying on with life. This method of subjugation can disguise itself as something as innocent as the giver and the receiver being of similar morality, and those deemed degenerate waste as such without the resources and rights to work for their own health and prosperity. You even state so yourself, for why else would religious individuals need protections from anti-discrimination laws that uselessly stereotypes civilians for the purpose of making already illegal acts clarified on a more meticulous level? The beings tasked with upholding a nation of freedom and peace often share many of your beliefs and ethics, yet somehow their influence sets the precedence for the same people you raise the alarm over to be legally stripped of their right to live as they see fit. Organized religions seemingly love to conflate a differing opinion with the start of societal degradation. Being gay or trans doesn't make one automatically a pedophile, rapist, or groomer, nor is the choice to cease the potential for life reliant on said individual, perhaps to avoid the tribulations propagated by a flawed guardian arduously trying and failing to raise them with knowledge that they never received, require the forfeiture of same citizens' life as recompense. I agree that the science is important. Incompetent as I have found my mind to be for the full comprehension of the monumental advances during my lifetime, struggle, patience, and repetition of common knowledge has led to a very basic and possibly misled conclusions. However, what science, what logos, gives you this principle you repeatedly defend on the value of all life? Where do the definitions of good and evil present themselves physically to be applied to the scientific method? Life itself is not inherently the science for the continuation of said life. Else, not only do the worst offenders go free, but a call must be had for the elimination of all weapons, all medications like penicillin and ivermectin, all chemical cleaners and water treatment practices, eating anything but carrion from natural death, even vaccines that have halted the destruction of millions, possibly nations, for history is rife with the effects of disease. There is no science that defends the preservation of one life over another. This is a subject of perspective often skewed as common sense, since virtue-based cajoling on ancient grandstanding has lost some popularity. So then, yes, the Bible was the proper text. The problem is, the Old Testament doesn't support the view all babies must be saved. Mike Pence just foolishly convinced himself as a Christian that his New Testament held not the same flaws. Numbers 14:3. And wherefore hath the Lord brought us into this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be prey? Were it not better for us to return into Egypt? And they said one to another, Let us make a captain, and let us return into Egypt. And the Lord said unto Moses, How long will this people provoke me? And how long will it be ere they believe me, for all the signs which I have showed among them? I will smite them with the pestilence, and disinherit them, and will make of thee a greater nation mightier than they. And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, Your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and all that were numbered of you, according to your whole number, from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured against me. But your little ones, which ye said should be a prey, them will I bring in, and they shall know the land which ye have despised. Numbers 25:6. And behold, one of the children of Israel came and brought unto his brethren a Midianitish woman in the sight of Moses, and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel, who were weeping before the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he went after the man of Israel into the tent, and thrust both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman through her belly. So the plague was stayed from the children of Israel. And the Levite, the husband of the woman that was slain, answered and said, Judges 24. And the Judges 20, verse 4. And the Levite, the husband of the woman that was slain, answered and said, I came unto Gibeah that belongeth to Benjamin, I and my concubine to lodge. And the men of Gibeah rose against me, and beset the house round about upon me by night, and thought to have slain me, and my concubine have they forced that she is dead. And the children of Israel inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I yet again go out to battle against the children of Benjamin my brother, or shall I cease? And the Lord said, Go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into thine hand. And the liers in wait hasted and rushed upon Gibeah. And the liers in wait drew themselves along, and smote all the city with the edge of the sword. But when the flame began to arise up out of the city with a pillar of smoke, the Benjamites looked behind them, and behold, the flame of the city ascended up to heaven. Therefore they turned their backs before the men of Israel unto the way of the wilderness. But the battle overtook them, and them which came out of the cities they destroyed in the midst of them. And the men of Israel turned again upon the children of Benjamin, and smote them with the edge of the sword, as well as the men of every city, as the beast, and all that came to hand. Also they set on fire all the cities that they came to. Ezekiel 9, verse 4. And the Lord said unto him, Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and that cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. And to the others he said in mine hearing, Go ye after him through the city, and smite. Let not your eye spare, neither have ye pity. Slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children and women. But come not near any man upon whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary. Then they began at the ancient men which were before the house. And he said unto them, Defile the house, and fill the courts with the slain. Go ye forth. And they went forth and slew in the city. And it came to pass, while they were slaying them, and I was left, that I fell upon my face and cried, and said, Ah, Lord God, wilt thou destroy all the residue of Israel in thy pouring out of thy fury upon Jerusalem? Then he said unto me, The iniquity of the house of Israel and Judah is exceeding great, and the land is full of blood, and the city full of perverseness. For they say, The Lord hath forsaken the earth, and the Lord seeth not. Sounds to me like the Lord didn't even value the lives of his chosen people, born or yet created, purely on the basis of being alive. Certain criteria had to be met, and the faith you professed seemed to be inadequate, so much so your God disinherited you and told his prophets of your annihilation, and supposedly a few hundred years before he sent his son to be killed in Roman fashion. Not the point, for I desire to call out the yea for me, nay for thee, human instinct that undercuts so much of the Bible, allowing for misinterpretation. Obviously, not just the Bible, for faith and tradition play equal parts in dictating our processing of information and the reactions we have to injustice. The eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth retardedness that I hear frequently but have yet to see in physical form. Hell, even when I hear it said, the words that almost always immediately follow are generally contradictory to the point itself, as entertaining as I would find it to now proceed with all the politicians, judges, and influencers that scream profile at everyone while finding mercy and exemptions regarding their own lives. I'll just settle with showing that old Jeebus, and most definitely those he charged with carrying on his message, were just as short-sighted and left the door open for the same errors of humanity. Matthew 11, verse 7. And as they departed, Jesus began to say unto the multitudes concerning John, What went ye out in the wilderness to see? Was it a reed shaken with the wind? And they answered him, No. Then he began to upbraid the cities wherein most of his mighty works were done, because they repented not. And thou, Capernaum, which art exalted unto heaven, shalt be brought down to hell. For if the mighty works which have been done in thee had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for thee. And even as they did not like to retain God. Romans 1, verse 28. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, according to some to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whispers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, and some knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are inexcusable, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. Romans 2, verse 12. For as many as have sinned without law shall also perish without law, and as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. Romans 3, verse 9. If not so, what then are we better than they? No, in no wise, for we have proved before that the Jews and Gentiles are all under sin. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understandeth, there is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way, they are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Romans 5, verse 12. Wherefore, as by one man's sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. For I say that through the offense, death reigned over all from Adam to Moses, even over them that had not sinned after the similitude of Adam's transgression, who is the figure of him that was to come. Romans 6, verse 23. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Revelations 2, verse 20. Notwithstanding, I have a few things against thee, because thou sufferest that woman Jezebel, which calleth herself a prophetess, to teach and to seduce my servants to commit fornication, and to eat things sacrificed unto idols. And I gave her space to repent of her fornication, and she repented not. Behold, I will cast her into hell, and them that commit adultery with her into great tribulation, except they repent of their deeds. And I will kill her children with death, and all the churches shall know that I am he which searcheth the reins and hearts, and I will give unto every one of you according to your works. I tell myself I'm insane. It's almost impossible to read any hopeful section of the Scriptures without reading just a bit further and finding out some of the consequences for non-adherence to the rules laid out. In simpler terms, life, liberty, happiness, freedoms are only for the obedient. Sounds a tad contradictory, though maybe the orders sounds a tad contradictory, though maybe the orders to be obeyed aren't those the institutions prefer to focus on. So often I would try to point out a more potent, encompassing interpretation to elders, teachers in my youth, and I would just get solemn nods at best, if not completely shuffled off to stay on the message they wanted to preach, not what truth they should be concerned about. For instance, before I decided I was an atheist, I attended a religious summer camp, and my second time there, I was definitely in a crisis of faith. One of the silly little classes they had, I was charged with discussing the sin of curse words. My vast knowledge of the scriptures instantly set to work on recalling all the verses I knew, and I started the research. It did not take long, at 15, to quickly realize I had never brought comprehension to the verses, for in nigh every instance, the subject had nothing to do with specific words being of a sinful nature. Imagine that. An all-powerful being doesn't give a fuck about certain vibrations made by the muscles in the throat, but how we direct it at one another. Not a popular take, though another instance a bit later was a little more understandable. At this point I was openly atheistic, and I reveled in any who thought to engage with me on the topic of religion, as I knew the basis for the faith like the back of my hand. I would not seek a scientific or philosophical approach to the debate, as I had no significant exposure to these things, and I thought it was a poor way to achieve the destruction of faith. Instead, I argued from the same perspective as they, that the book was written originally by those who claimed to, and that they felt inspired to write such moral obligations. My points showed their prophets were all just human, refusing to cherry-pick. I would lay out the logical conclusions of their methods and show the contradictory nature of the ideals with the practice. It didn't accomplish anything, though. I would recognize this even after my paper on the Islamic faith, attempting to demolish the accusations of fanaticism, violence, and show its brotherhood to the Abrahamic faith they profess themselves, went over like a wet towel. Frustrating, but not enough to see the problems I threw on top of it. After being refuted in the manner I was at college, and I read into the subjects I've tossed mentions at, it slowly dawned on me that I was acting in a manner no different than those that I claimed to be deceived, or deceivers. I didn't need to attack any religion, for at the end of the day my thoughts were my own, and those who sought to sway them would fail, for they did it for themselves. My reproach at their attempts only cemented their convictions of righteousness, or, much, much worse, wrecked their belief, opening them up to whatever rhetoric could appeal to their mentality. Instead, I had to show that these qualities of goodness were not unique to a human, no matter the race, creed, location, gender, and that the judgment we feel justified in passing down was not supported by any faith at its core, even if the Creator most definitely wrote it that way. A method of freedom, a grain of truth, lay at the heart of ideals that saw their genesis in the reasoning of people who felt there was a better way, but lost it when faced with a less profitable route, being the actions needed for an example to teach those they preached at. Control, punishment, rewards, obedience. The way I read the Bible, the confusion humans get over following a commandment and being the one to teach everybody else the correct adherence to it, is where shit hits the fan. According to the early days at least, God didn't even want his people to have a king, because the judges weren't supposed to be in charge. God was supposed to be the only leader, because all were created equal, but the humility of certain ones earned them favor. That didn't translate to every one of the generations they would propagate, and neither did the qualities behind those ideals heralded by self-appointed teachers, judges of their peers. You tell me how you interpret 1 Samuel chapter 8. Go ahead. Go read it yourselves if you need the proof. I don't feel like quoting more scripture at this moment. Fuck. Read the whole damn thing. You might see what I'm talking about when I say it's not about the gayness or witchcraft or foul language or promiscuity of an individual, but the words I read speaks of those using their intellect, their station, their wealth, their power to force others to partake in personal desires against the will comprehension of the target. The entirety of the motherfucking thrice goddamn scriptures say it, along with so many other religious texts. All the insightful, controversial words used in the Bible are humans obsessing over their conception of what the problem is, because to admit the issue I write on would be to speak against themselves. Hypocrites. Liars for having even opened your mouths. Put pen to paper. It is fan-fucking-tastic that you feel deeply about the call to your spouse and the continuation of the human race. Nothing on this earth or off it gives you the right to bend others to this outcome, nor support those who would seek force of any nature to ensure unanimity on the matter. So yes, the individual slave masters and Nazis did have a fucking choice. At any moment, any one of them could have had some fucking courage and said, no, this doesn't match the principles I profess to hold dear. Yeah, that probably means death, or at the very least, utter disgrace. But the action and those that proceed should be a reflection of the standard preached. These dynamics aid all the kind enemy master stories that are utter nonsense, as the humans understood the core truth that led so many astray, but lacked the courage to halt profiting off the mass manipulation by the holders of popular attention, utilizing the message to twist out their own designs. I have gone way off the fucking deep end. Cease your nuttery. I wish I could convince myself that your points were from a place of study, attention to detail, and critical thinking, but your own statements presented as fact give evidence to the opposite. One of the few specified instances you used to support your opinions, Kermit Gosnell, was rife with inaccuracies I felt beneath the level of critique presented throughout your video. You claimed it hardly got covered in the mainstream media. However, not only did I find numerous articles written during and after the discovery, but Fox and even the liberal jokes at CNN covered the event. Your abortion-loving buddy, Jank, did a segment on the atrocities done under Kermit's authority 2 years before yourself. And no, it was not agreeable for such methods. Of course, none of these points make it seem like abortionists want the wholesale slaughter of infants, simultaneously exploiting the very real proclivity for industries to hide controversial information to imply complicity towards the same goals. Does any of that really change the action of ceasing the growth of parasitic cells within the body as the destruction of life? Why not just approach the subject with complete openness and recognition? Fucking damn it all, I'm being a fucking prick again. Look then, and all those who agree with his stances, abortion is defined here. 1. The act of giving premature birth with loss of the fetus, especially in the period before a live birth is possible. Induced termination of a pregnancy to destroy a fetus. B. Figurative. Failure. 2. The imperfect offspring or product of a miscarriage, a person or thing dwarfed or mishappen. 3. Biology. Arrestment of development of any organ, especially of a seed or fruit. I have no idea if you desire to have more children, but would it be acceptable to see your spouse jailed, killed for the natural loss of your child for the legal system needs proof? Evidence to remove all doubt you and your wife didn't fail to provide for the growth via a beneficial habitat. the temple that is her body? Did she eat and drink appropriately, acquiring only the nutrients for nourishing life, even before her pregnancy? Or perhaps a sedentary lifestyle leaves her body inadequate, just as likely that an attempt to be the opposite providing the same result. Maybe the environment is poor, poisoning the body with the economic waste pushed into our air, water, and soil by humanity's greed, by all we partake, breathe, and no attempt is made to remove ourselves from the scenario. What would you do when that life lost threatens the existence of the one you're commanded to cherish? Would you trust a being labeled felon, murderer, for simply having the knowledge to save your wife with doing so? Would you continue to support figures that would see actions of kindness prosecuted and repeat their dogma? Oi, I'm fucking done with this. 'Cause I ain't done with you fucks at TYT yet. Once more, I get to talk about our Second Amendment. Whoopee. I'm starting to feel like a broken record this far in, but the subject is brought up frequently and is one that you guys discuss in a manner I loathe in equal parts to the counter logic put forth, and for exactly the same reasons. The passion you feel over the needless loss of life is commendable, but I find myself entering a tizzy every time I hear what I perceive as verbiage detrimental to persuading those who believe they disagree with you at enmity. For every 10 who nod in acknowledgement, how many set their feet into the ground, shutting themselves off from critical thinking? The fancy fucking words you intellectuals love to use at their heart have a physical action, and the consequences that stem from them have long been recorded. That is to say, those who may not know the specific jargon utilized can easily interpret such as a call for repression, sometimes spurred on by those engaging in the same intent or not, but parroting as the opposer, a champion for those trodden underfoot. Don't get it twisted. I am not some gun-loving, flag-hugging dickbag. I fucking hate guns. There are few inventions, conceptions by humanity I find as cowardly as the desire to sit all nice and cozy and take life on a whim. But it was necessary, right? Get the advantage, good tactics, good business. Stay on target. It only barely beats out explosives and bows as the weapons of war for chicken shit behavior. Though like bows, I understand their utility in the same breath. We aren't as fast and or as big as many creatures we share the planet with, and the capability to diversify our diet and defend ourselves from predators in arguably a far more humane fashion is only something I can praise. I'm a fucking monster, though, as when it comes to the pettiness we engage in to validate the slaughter of one another, there should only be swords, knives, axes, spears, etc. Fucking sycophants posing as men, speaking like your willingness to defend with lily-livered methods and justifications makes you strong. You desire not civil war, bloodshed, or even the protection of the innocent. Not a one of you appreciates life to have the stones to hack another sapien to pieces, stare into their eyes as your actions cease their vision only to search out another, waiting amongst the blood and limbs accompanied by the screeching of dying foes, comrades, family members. You're not even warriors who should couple the knowledge of how to end life with the training, restraint, perseverance to preserve it. Barely soldiers, blindly following orders. Fucking shit. War is sweet to those who have never experienced it. Oh boy, now you got me doing it, Jenk. How about I just quote you a little, and we'll try and continue this. I talk about on the show all the time that these shootings happen everywhere. They're gonna happen everywhere. There's a mass shooting on average about once a day in America. We're all gonna be treated like prisoners, everywhere is going to be like an airport. Or we could do something about guns. Shooting at YouTube HQ. The Young Turks channel. The Young Turks YouTube channel. The left wing constantly says nonviolence, preaches nonviolence, is for gun control so that there is less violence. Remind me again who the hateful people are that encourage violence. None of these people are left wing. How the internet reacted to TYT's shooting coverage. The Young Turks YouTube channel. I would say that's dangerously close to fear-mongering. Perhaps profiling if I didn't know you guys better. Time and time again you've spoken out about those who seemingly act in such a manner to defend old principles, unsubstantiated tropes, presumably so you can show the country as a whole a better way to exist. However, in this attempt your fervor can obfuscate the message, meaning those who relate to the individual being villainized for a freedom-destroying action may reject your logic, translating the message they hear as a call for themselves, having not acted similarly, to be held subject in the name of protection. I fail to see any consistency when you place violence solely at the feet of citizens who falsely think themselves opposite of you. You love all the statistics and fancy-sounding scientific studies, while you with the same mind yelling into the ether about the corruption of the top. Who do you believe sets the qualifications for these accolades? Who funds the peons to put out the self-gratifying statements of fact? Are there no foundational equivocates between the distraught who act against their peers regardless of the races, creeds, genders, or politics present? Numerous cases over the years, I've heard you implore this nation to cease the hatred and murder of minorities and individuals who live outside historic norms at the hands of the enforcers of authoritarianism. Rail against policies instituted that, in reality, promote demagoguery towards citizens underneath the law's fancy phrasing, as well as using the trials and tribulations of the disenfranchised lives as a plea for mercy. In the case of Rittenhouse, just 'cause he gets acquitted does not mean the state thinks it was hunky-dory. They just couldn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. The second guy hit him with a skateboard. Now, I wouldn't kill anyone if they hit me with a skateboard. Do we want people walking around with a weapon provoking people and then as soon as they're threatened in any way start killing people? So anything before 30 seconds before he started killing people you can't question. But they think the motivations of the people who died should go into our evaluation of this, but not the motivations of the guy who took a gun he never should have had across state lines. Rittenhouse found not guilty on all accounts. Rittenhouse found not guilty on all counts. The Young Turks YouTube channel. Violence. How do we as a society define such? Does it only qualify when it's against us and those we empathize with? Do we celebrate accomplishments in the same vein, but under the pretense of justice? When an entity or collection of human beings are charged with upholding the continued operation of the whole, often the methods used to ensure the words set have physical meaning are glossed over in favor of terrifying, inspiring, commanding, charitable phrases that inflame our hearts and cease our minds. I cannot speak for you, but I see the messages of those asserting lawfulness to validate their means, setting a standard they care not to follow, but its obligation by others profits them. I do not believe that at any that at any point or in any fashion the abolishment of guns would solve even a minute fraction of the enmity that pressures humanity. The association you seem to correlate between violence and a single tool that can be used to carry out the events we've racked up in our recent history makes it hard for me to see any honesty. I'm not going to rehash all the oversimplified exposition I went through earlier in the abortion thoughts. Bearing that in mind, though, I hear a whole lot of state-sanctioned violence in carrying out a working method of getting the mass amounts of guns out of circulation. Yes, this may drastically reduce the ease of opportunity for mass casualties caused by our peers, our equals, depending on what words we use to classify these events. For all those who have or will commit such atrocities, maybe only half in this hypothetical gun-regulated scenario would harbor such resentment past a fleeting thought, and say only half of them try to find a method to create their thoughts, and hell, only half of them see the project through, with only half of them being successful in accomplishing the goal. Those are good statistics. Put a cease to violence, right? Well, actually, we still gotta cover the legal violence. Those are good statistics. Put a cease to violence, right? Well, actually, we still gotta cover the legal violence. Surely, I know you understand that even taking the measures I listed earlier would still leave exemptions for some of our populace. I can't wrap my mind around how you call for the rehabilitation of our police forces while leaving this important nuance out of the presentation for gun control. I doubt that even the most extreme believer of such methods would agree with all the details that originate in the ideal. I find it irksome how I let anger best me when you speak like the UK somehow solved violence with their gun control measures, but even some of their officers carry guns. I can't imagine what they would need them for in this day and age, and there's ultimately the military forces of the world. You can't possibly want to send our troops out with nothing but supplies in their two hands. I despise the setup of our current military-industrial complex, but to abolish the military in such a manner, would we go to all the countries we've wronged with hollow placations and trade promises when they come for their pound of flesh? It'd be fine, right? Humanity's known for its restraint in the pursuit of justice. Fuck. While we're at it, let's just restrict ingenuity, the tools for crafting said creativity. Hell, we can even do it through some sly disincentives against learning anything remotely how to. Take notes, coming up with totally new, unprecedented shit here. With such laws, we could effectively create another class of civilian, and those of us without the right to hold such freedoms are now at the whims of the individuals who hold this privilege. You guys have helped teach this as you rant over case after case of this very issue already prevalent in history. How would we fix that? Maybe the offenders are just bad apples. Or perhaps we cheer for the further enslavement to our institutions, government entities, ultimately foolish literature, to preempt a potential future rather than the equality of resources to strategize our lives away from whatever problems may come. Is it just guns that kill us when we raise our voices against the mismanagement by those entrusted? Or is it more the bombs, gases, blunt force trauma, fucking 4 stone walls, and forceful chemical mastication? Another point you don't actually have a foot to stand on because you don't truly hate the prison system. You just don't like how it's operated.